Okay, we are now recording. I'm going to turn off my webcam and start sharing a couple of applications that I want to share. Pie chart, and I want to make sure I share, come on, my web browser so we can cover the slides. And I'll probably need to share something else later, but we'll get to that when we get to that. All right, so these slides have been posted to the, a PDF version at least, have been posted to the GitHub site. I try very hard not to simply walk through my slides as a lecture because that is awful boring for everybody, you and me as well. So the slides are out there to do two things. One, give you a lot of information that you should take away from the lecture ahead of time, or after the fact, either one. And two, it gives me a guideline to make sure that when I'm done for the day, I've actually covered everything that's in the slides to make sure I haven't freelanced too much. So I try not to do it. If I skip around on the slides a little bit, it's because I'm trying not to do a presentation. I'm trying to cover the material and actually teach. At the same time, though, I do need a guide. Feel free to interrupt at any time with questions. Either voice or chat would be fine. I do try to follow the chat, but every now and then I can't see things immediately, but we'll get there. Administrative notes, I generally have these toward the beginning of each lecture. Again, make sure that you attend your discussion section tomorrow. That is on Discord. There is a lab assignment. You can reach your TA. Homework 0 is out. It's also due Friday night at midnight. There's a Google Doc. When we do homework assignments, they're generally handed out in the form of Google Docs. This is the assignment. You can click on that and it will take you to the actual site with the assignment. You can talk about it more. This is largely practice. This homework assignment is to give you practice at using GL and submitting things and getting familiar with the shell script bash that I mentioned. And I apologize, I'm getting myself a little confused here because I've got the two different computers and the two different mice and I'm grabbing the wrong mouse for the wrong system, but that's okay. So the syllabus is out. I did also on the Discord non-majors channel put a tentative schedule for how we're going to handle this semester. If you look at it in the non-major section, you will see that schedule is there, should be linked. Okay, here we go. That's the video. Here's the schedule. Ballpark, this will tell you when you can expect to see exams. Tentatively, the first exam is Wednesday, March the 3rd. I tried to give exams on Wednesday so that I could use the Monday lecture as a review. The Monday lecture, for example, March 1st, will cover anything that we haven't covered, make sure we covered it. We're up to date on the exam. And then the actual exam will be Wednesday, the 3rd of March. Second midterm, exam 2, tentatively, we're looking at April 14th. That, again, is a Wednesday. The 12th of March, Monday, will be the review for it. We'll cover a new topic there. The last class, according to the UMBC schedule, is Monday, is the 12th of May. That will be used as a review. And then our final will be whenever it's scheduled for an exam week. I haven't bothered to look at the calendar yet, but as of now, we'll just make it, the regular exam time. That's linked in Discord. You can take a look at it. I make a note that, this talks about what we're going to cover. I reserve the right to change the schedule throughout the semester because sometimes we're just going to need to slow down and cover things in more detail. And sometimes things are a lot easier than I think they'll be, so I could actually speed up. But that'll give you a guide as to where we are. You'll notice that's a little bit different from what the majors are going to do. That's fine. We cover things a little bit differently. Okay, I wanted to talk about a couple of things I put out on Discord. We're going to do that at the end of the semester, end of the class, end of the semester, end of class. One of those being how to use SSH on Windows, and the other a program to transfer files between your laptop and GL. I presume that you're going to do your programming in this class initially on your laptop, and you will write code on GL and turn it in when you need to. Therefore, we're going to make it easy to do everything on your laptop in PyCharm. You will, through your labs, practice on GL. That's okay. When I talk and give examples, I'm going to use PyCharm in this on my laptop, generally on the Mac. Okay. You will learn how to do it the old-fashioned way using Emacs on GL, but I presume you're going to do it the new way using an IDE like PyCharm on your laptop. Again, not required. In Python, in any computer language, you need to know two terms, and these are the same in computer languages as it is in a human language: a syntax and semantics. The syntax is what the rules are for the language. I mean, in English, we think a sentence has to start with a capital letter. It has to end with a period. It has to have a subject and a predicate. Sometimes those are understood or implicit. But, you know, you've got rules that you have to be legitimate English. You have rules that you have to follow to be legitimate Python. C++, Java, similar. When you break the rules, what happens is the Python interpreter cannot understand what you mean, and therefore it just barks. It throws an error, referred to as a syntax error, that says, you didn't follow the rules of the language. I can't understand this, so I'm not going to run. Here's your error. Fix it. Semantics means you followed all the rules about letters, words, punctuation, what have you. What did you mean by them? You can have a grouping of words that begins with a capital letter, it ends with a period, and has a subject and a predicate, a noun and a verb. But it doesn't mean what you think it means. And that happens often in computer programming. When the program runs, but it doesn't produce the results you want, that's because you had an error in semantics. Semantics is, what did it mean? Did it do what you wanted? The computer will do what you told it to do that might not be what you wanted it to do. So as we go through this class and as we do programming today and in the future, we have both syntax issues. You have to use the right sets of letters and words and punctuation, and we have semantics. You got that right, but it still didn't do what you want. So if you want the program to do what you want the program to do, both your syntax and your semantics have to be correct. Now, some terms we're going to use in this lecture and throughout this class that you need to be familiar with. So at the end of the day, at 5:15 p.m. today, you should understand what I mean when I say a comment, a variable, a literal, a constant, a reserved word, and a type. And now we're going to talk about each of those in the context of actually writing Python code. Now, so I'm going to switch to PyCharm, which I hope if somebody can write in the chat and make sure you can see PyCharm, that I'm actually sharing that, or just tell me verbally that it's fine. You got it?
We can see it.
Yeah.
Cool. Will these things also be on Blackboard? Which, when you ask what will they be in Blackboard or discussion, are you asking about the assignments?
Yeah,
the assignments I can put on Blackboard. I generally don't, but the labs will be handed out. We can talk about it. So you've got PyCharm. Great. When you open PyCharm, I put a note, and we'll talk about it at the end of the class. When you download PyCharm and run it on your computer, you probably also have to go to python.org and download the a Python interpreter. PyCharm does not come with Python. Now, depending on what computer you have, a Mac already comes with Python. Windows, I haven't looked at Windows 10. It may or may not. You may have to go to python.org and download Python. We'll talk at the end of class about how to do that if you have to. So right now I have PyCharm and I have Python. To use PyCharm, when I want to start out, I need to start with a new project. So I go up here to the menu, which says File. I select New Project. It lets me start a new project. Now, I did this a little while ago. I selected New Project, and I called my project Spring 2021. This is where my Python code is going to be. So I have a project called Spring 2021. When you do this, when you create that project, that's when it's going to ask you things. I'm going to call this something else so that I don't mess up my Spring 2021 project. I'm just going to call it Demo. And I'm going to say Create, and I'm going to put it in this window. And it's going to have a default, which I'm going to get rid of. So this is where you will be asked what compiler you want, where this is, anything else. Now I'm going to go back to my Spring 2021 project, if I can find it, what I do with it. I need to close this project. And now I'm going to open my Spring 2021 project. So now I'm back. Okay, so that's what happens is you create a new project by that, and it'll let you configure everything. And then you come up here and say File, New, and then it'll ask you for New File, New whatever. You select New File. In this case, I've called it February 1 coding.py. All of your Python programs should end in .py. That's a convention we follow. Dirty secret is it will run without it, but you should get in the habit of calling it .py. This is going to be loaded to the GitHub site later on when we're done, and so I just give it today's date so that when you go to look at it later on, you'll see, oh yes, February 1 coding, that's what Arsenal did in class, not a problem. Now, I said you should learn the term comment. In Python, this is a comment. The hashtag. Now, you can call that the hashtag. You can call that the pound sign. You can call that the sharp. I had a music major last semester. That was a sharp. That's fine. Hashtag pound. Don't care what you call it. Any of those things. That indicates a comment. This is a comment. This will not be executed. This is a note to a human being. A comment is a note to a human being that says, this is what we think we're trying to do. Okay, this is what we think we're trying to do in with our code, and here's a note. It's not going to be executed. This is a very useful thing. You will be required in your assignments, for example, to turn in certain comments that have like your name and your section, so we know whose program is who. And the style guides will tell you that, here's the comments you have to have. So when we say a comment, what we mean is this is something that's not actually a line of code. It's never executed. Python ignores it. It's a note to a human. And in Python, it begins with a pound sign. I call it a pound sign. It's a hashtag. It's a sharp. It's whatever. Okay. Now, it doesn't have to be at the beginning of a line. We'll get to that in a minute. The next term that we need to learn is a literal. I'll put a comment. A literal means use this exact value. Okay. We wrote a program at the very end of Wednesday's lecture. The first Python program we've ever wanted to write. Anytime you learn a new language, you want it to say, hello world. Print hello world on the screen. Now, in PyCharm, you have a couple of different things. You have a Python console, A Python console is a command line interpreter, or is a Python interpreter. What this does by these three greater than signs is you can put Python code there and it will execute it a line at a time. And this is very useful for testing code, running programs, things like that. So I'm going to copy my line, print hello world here. This is a Mac, so it's Command C, Command V on Windows. This would be Control C, Control V. I just copied the line of code and put it there. And I hit enter. And since this is a valid line of syntax, a valid line of Python, it executes and it printed hello world. Now, remember what I said? Let me explain it, what I said earlier about you don't have to put that pound sign at the beginning of a line. What I'm going to do is after this line of code, I'm going to put a pound sign. Okay, hang on a second. Why are we not responding? There we go. Hello world is a literal. So, a literal. You need to be familiar with the term when I say a literal. A literal says this is an exact value. Okay? It's not a variable. It doesn't change. It's not a formula. It's not something that has to be evaluated. It is use this exactly. When I say print hello world, what that means is print exactly this string, these letters. This is a literal. Take me literally, not figuratively, take me literally, print this exactly. And so that's what Python does down here. It printed hello world. Now, I put this particular literal in between double quotes. Let's put a comment here. Python allows use of double quotes and single quotes equivalently but you can't mix them. What do I mean by that? Let's come down here. The keys, the arrow keys, are going to be very useful in programming. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to hit the up arrow key. The up arrow key on my keyboard says just repeat the last line. Repeat the last thing I did. Now, I only did one thing, but if I continued hitting the up arrow key, it would backspace through all the last commands. So the up arrow key is something you want to learn how to use. That says print the last command that I did. So I just hit the up arrow key and it gave me the print hello world command again. Now, in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that single quotes and double quotes are equivalent. You can use whichever you want. I tend to be the kind of guy who uses single quotes when I'm dealing with Python. Not always, but mostly. So print hello world in single quotes, and the result is the same. Let me make this console a little bit bigger. You can see that the result is exactly the same. Okay. But you cannot mix your single quotes and your double quotes. Okay. Here, I now said print hello world, which worked with single quotes, which worked with double quotes, but I have one single quote and I have one double quote. Now, the advantage of using an IDE, an integrated development environment like PyCharm, is that it will tell me ahead of time something's wrong. Okay, if you see this red squiggly underline, what that means is that Python thinks you made an error. So you should fix this. Now, in this case, I'm going to ignore the fact that I made an error, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to execute that command anyway. And what's going to happen is that it's not going to execute. What these three dots mean right here is that Python thinks I haven't hit the end of a command. Python thinks I'm still in the middle of this single quote string. I've never hit the second single quote, so it thinks I'm still doing something. And so now I have to come in and hit the other end of it. And so I still haven't hit it. You can see now that I'm just in this endless loop of really bad stuff. This doesn't work. This is a syntax error. This is an error of syntax because I used a single quote, I used a double quote, I violated the rules that say I have to use the same on both sides. And so as a result, this is not working correctly. Now, it's not barfing, it's not giving me an error. It's just going to continually wait for me to say, are you sure? Anytime now, go ahead and, fix this mess. So, terms, a comment. A comment is something that's not going to be executed. So line is a note to you, the programmer, you, the reviewer. A literal. A literal means use this exact value. In this case, this is the exact value, hello world. Okay. And by the way, when I use this particular literal, I can use single quotes or I can use double quotes, but I can't mix them. That's fine. Now, when you're using PyCharm, what I've been doing so far is I've been going down into this Python console and copying code, which is a great way to do this one line at a time, test something out. If you want to execute everything in this window, everything in this edit window at once, you just come up here to click run. I want to run February 1 coding. What this does is it gives me a terminal window. It executed my code. It printed hello world, which is what I wanted it to do. And after the program ran, it told me it finished with exit code 0. Exit code 0 means the program worked. So when you're in PyCharm and you're testing and you're running a line or two at a time, use the console, and you'll find that that's what often I will do. I will copy a few lines of code into the console and execute it, because that way I can find whether it works or not, or I can fix the error. Hint, some of the errors I'm going to make on purpose to illustrate things like mixing the quote marks. Some of the errors I'm going to make just because I'm careless and I just type something or I don't remember exactly how something works. And like I said, no live demo ever works perfectly. So when you're using PyCharm, Python console to test, run a few lines, run the whole program if you really want to execute. Now, type. Okay. I want to go back to the slides for just a minute. So I'll go back to Chrome and I'll go down toward one of my last slides, one of my later ones. And I'll talk a little bit about how a computer works. This is very simplified. This is very, we're going to go through this more detail later in the semester. But for now, just bear with me. This is a simplified description of how Python works and how a computer works. You have a processor which executes instructions, and you have memory. Now, this is normally what's called RAM, or random access memory, although it could be on a hard disk. It doesn't matter. Okay, it could be on a USB key. It could be anywhere. Memory is a whole bunch of places to store data. You can think about it as being a one-dimensional array. Go back to your math class, and this is just an array of places to put stuff. Right? And every single location has an address and it holds bits. Now, when I say bits, bits is short for binary digits, and it's just a long string of ones or zeros. Okay? So typically with today's computers, you will have a minimum of 64 bits. And so in a location in memory that might hold more, I will have some string of 1010. Well, let me do this. 100000001. This is a simple case. And apologize for the dog barking in the background. This has 8 bits. I mean, this is what a computer does, right? This is how a computer works, is it has this string of bits. I've simplified with 8. There's typically at least 64, could be longer. And there's an address, and the computer knows that this thing has this long address and how to get to it. Now, what does 111000001 mean? I mean, it's a string of bits, right? It's a string of ones and zeros. What does it mean? Well, what it means is determined by its type. You can tell Python, I want this to be treated as an integer number. An integer, a whole number. -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, -1,000,000, 9,552,132. Whatever, a whole number. I want this to be treated as an integer. If you treat 1000001 as an integer, you're going to get the value 65. Don't worry about how, we just do. If you know base 2 arithmetic, you can convert that. That should be 65, unless I've screwed up again. Okay. If you treat that as a letter, that's going to be a capital A. It actually is in most representation systems, going back to ASCII. That's how you represent a capital A. So things have types. The actual locations in memory, the actual computer is a string of bits. What that means is determined by its type. Now, let's go back to pie chart. We care about ints or integers. String. A string is 0 or more characters. Okay. Now, I say 0, yes, you actually can have a 0-length string. You can have 0 characters, and we'll get into that later on. But for now, you can look at, just some number of characters. There's typically the maximum number of characters in a string depends on what version of Python and what your computer is, but it's a big honking number. You're probably not going to run into any maximum length of string that we care about in 201. Later on you might, but for now, don't worry about how long a string can be. It can be big enough. You also have float. Now, what Python considers a real number, a number that's not an integer, like, 3.14159, Python calls that a float. Okay. And the last type we're going to worry about right now is a Boolean. Okay. There was a mathematician named George Boole. Boole came up with this math where everything is true, false, everything is 0 or 1. And so in Python, a bool is of something that has the value true or false. And I can't type with it. Okay. Now, hint. Python is case sensitive. Okay. The value true, TRUE, is a reserved word. That's a Boolean value, true. TRUE, all lowercase, TRUE, all uppercase, those are not Boolean values. The only Boolean values are uppercase T, everything else lowercase, uppercase F, everything else lowercase. These are not Boolean values. These are things that could be anything you want them to be. Python is case sensitive. Now, so obviously then, hello world is a string. Okay. And so when somebody asks you, what about a string literal? What is a string literal? A string literal is a literal, here's an exact value to use, that is of type string. And then as we've seen, all strings go between 2 double quotes or 2 single quotes. So anytime you're writing in Python and you're using strings, you put them between 2 double quotes or 2 single quotes. So print, just print hello world on the screen. We've done this before. Name error, name hello is not defined. Warning ahead of time. When Python gives you an error, sometimes the error will be very good. Sometimes it'll be very explanatory. You'll know exactly what you did wrong. You'll figure it out. Other times, the error message is going to be very misleading. Python's not real good sometimes at telling you exactly what you did that caused the problem. In this case, the name hello is not defined. What Python did is it looked at this where I'm trying to print the string literal hello world. I did not put a string between single quotes. I did not put a string between double quotes. And so Python said, syntax error, I got no flipping clue what the heck you're trying to do here. Okay. And so the specific error it got was it thought that hello was a name and said, you haven't defined any name called hello. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay. So any string, 0 or more characters, has to be between single quotes and double quotes. Now, remember what I said about Booleans? If I say print true, Python prints true. Why? Because true is not a string. True is a Boolean value. So it's not a string. It doesn't have to be between single or double quotes. No problem. Okay. Print true. Python is case sensitive. Lowercase t is not a Boolean value. So this looks like a string literal or some other thing else. It's no single quotes, no double quotes. Python says, I don't know what the heck you're doing again here. Error. So strings go between single quotes or double quotes. Booleans do not. Integers do not. Print 9. 9 is an integer. Python says, I know how to print integers. It's an integer. It doesn't need to be between single quotes and double quotes. I'll just print the integer 9. If you want to print the string 9, it looks the same. We'll get into this. Be careful. That's a trap. The string 9 and the integer 9 are not the same. Okay? But you could print the integer 9. If you want to do the float, print 3.14159 pi. That's a float value. Python says, I know how to print floats. Not a problem. Okay, so what we've done here, that more things you need to know by the end of this lecture. Types. What is a type? A type simply tells Python how to interpret that string of bits in memory. How to interpret that, how to treat it as the number 65, the letter capital A, the string hello, comma, world, things like that. The types that we know about so far, the types that we care about. Integer numbers, Python calls ints. Strings, any sequence of 0 or more characters, all treated as a single thing. Floats are what Python calls real numbers, things that are not integers. And Booleans Booleans are things that only have the value true or false, where Python is case sensitive and true has to be in uppercase T and false has to be in uppercase F. Okay, those are the 4 types. And if you say these are the 4 types, these are the types I want this to be, Python says, I understand this and it can deal with it properly. Okay, so we've talked about types, we've talked about literals. Okay, in this case, 9 is a literal, exactly this. 3.14159 is a literal, exactly this. Now we're going to get into variables. I'm going to show you there is another type of comment you can do in Python. It's the triple double quote. Now, we generally use double quotes here. If you put 3 double quotes together, and then these are the matching 3 double quotes, anything in between here is treated as a comment. Okay? So if you have a whole block, a whole lot of comments, and you don't want to type all the pound signs or the hashtags, put your comment in between these double quotes. Okay? So anything, if you've got those 3 double quotes, anything in between there is a comment. Why I'm saying that is now I'm going to start talking about variables. Okay? A variable is a symbol, specifically, it's the name of something that has a value and it can change. It can vary. It is a variable. Okay? It has a type. So let's talk about hello world. And we don't want to print necessarily hello world. We want to print some arbitrary string. A is equal to hello, comma, world. Let me talk in a minute about that. I'm going to put a marker down and put another comment that says this is called an assignment statement. Print A. Okay. Now, I'm going to run those 2 lines of Python. I'm going to come down to my console. I'm not running the whole thing because I don't want to rerun all the previous code. I just want to run these 2 things. When I execute this statement, it works the same way. Okay, I get hello world just as I did before. Now the difference is I did not print a literal. I printed a variable. That variable happened to have the value hello world. Okay, now a single equal sign, just one equal sign together, or just one equal sign by itself, not 2 equal signs together, is what's called an assignment statement in Python. It assigns a value to a variable. Okay, it assigns the value to a variable. On Wednesday, we'll talk about what happens if you have a double equal sign, 2 equal signs together. Spoiler alert, that's what you use when you're comparing 2 things to see if they are equal. Okay, to avoid the double loading, the loading of the equal signs in Python, a single equal is an assignment statement. It assigns a value to a variable, and that's what we've covered here. Okay, so let's go back to the slides again and talk about this symbol table. In Python, unlike other computer languages, now if you notice is that if you've never programmed before, you're not in bad shape. Here we go. Here's the key. If you've programmed in other languages, this is important about Python. This is why Python's different from some other languages. You do not have to pre-declare a variable. Nowhere did I say, hey, Python, I'm going to use the variable A, and the variable A is going to be a string, and let's go. That did not happen. I didn't have to do that. Python did that automatically. Python saw that statement, A equals the string hello world, and Python said, gotcha. In the computer, what Python does is it manages something called a symbol table. Okay. The symbol table is a key data structure. We don't go into it in too much detail, except that you need to understand how it works and why Python works this way. Internal to the computer, you never have to interact with it. Python creates and manages a data structure. And this data structure, as I said, is called a symbol table. Anytime Python reads something that it figures out as a variable name, it says, aha, have I seen this variable name before? No. Python had never seen that A before when it saw that. So it said, aha, here is a new symbol. Here is a new variable name. This variable name is called A. And from the fact that Arsenal said A equals the string hello world, the symbol table says that is a string. And it grabs a location in memory and it keeps the address. And we'll just put a bunch of dots there. But Python manages memory and it goes to some place in memory that has no value right now, that isn't being used. And it says this is going to be A, and it's going to have the value hello, comma, world, the value of the string that I typed in. Now let's make this actually fit. Okay. And it says this is the location of A. And move it up just a bit. And A is a string and it has the value hello world. Okay. So when Python saw that statement, A equals the string hello world, Python had no reference. It didn't know what A was, but it said, okay, I can do this. I'll create a new entry in the symbol table. A is a variable name. It's going to be of type string. Why? Because it could figure out that I said A equals double quotes hello world. That's a string. Python's smart enough to say that's a string. It goes, it grabs the location in memory, and it keeps the address here in the symbol table. And in that location in memory, it keeps hello world. Now, the symbol table doesn't have the value. The symbol table doesn't have hello world. The symbol table says, go over there, go to this location in memory, and it puts it there. Now, what's that address look like? You don't have to worry about it now. It's going to vary by computer. But basically, it looks like this. This big honking number right here is the address in memory that it assigns to A. Okay. So I'll go over here just to make it complete. And right here, that's what it does. It says this location in memory is where I go to find the value of A, and that's the actual location in memory of this thing, and my computer's memory management unit will do this and what have you. And so this is what the symbol table is going to look like. When Python reads that first statement, it's going to say, create a new variable called A, it's string, and it's here. Why does it matter that it keeps the type, that it knows the type, that it knows it's a string? Because what's really here is not hello world. I've done that for human consumption. What's really here is a whole bunch of bits, a whole bunch of ones and zeros that could be anything depending on context. So that's why it needs to track what type it is. But Python creates this symbol table. It says A is in this location in memory, and it's of type string. So go over there and get its value. Let's go back to the program. This statement caused that entry in the symbol table. This is a comment. It got ignored. It had no meaningful purpose except to explain to a human this is what this is doing. Now, I executed this statement, print A. There's no double quotes. There's no single quotes. So clearly, A is not a string, right? If I had said print A, that would be print a string. This is a string literal, and I would see the letter A. But I didn't have that, right? I didn't have that single A, that single quote A, double quote A, so it wasn't a string. A is clearly not an integer. A is clearly not a float, and A is clearly not a Boolean. Therefore, the only possible thing A can be is a variable. So what Python does is Python goes back to that symbol table. And Python says, hey, has anybody ever heard of A? Well, lo and behold, yes. I know what A is. A is a string, and it's located right here. Python goes, thank you very much, symbol table. Python goes to this location in memory. Python gets hello world. And Python says, I'm supposed to print that. So that is indeed what happened when I ran the program. This statement assigned a value to hello world. This printed it. What if I wanted a different value? Remember, A is a variable. Okay, A is a variable. Let's change its value. A equals, what a great class. Okay, and now print A. Okay. Take it down here into the Python console, and look, printing A produces what a great class. Here, we assign the value hello world, and we printed it. Here, we assign the value what a great class and printed it. It all works the same way. This says, have I seen this? Give me a location in memory, store this value here, mark its type. This says, go to that location in memory, get the value, and print it. So, what is a variable? A variable is a symbolic name. It's a symbol. It's a name of a location in memory that can store a data, that stores some value of data, and it has a type, and it can change. Variable, type, change, and that's just the name. It's really some location in memory. Cool. That's what a variable is. Now, there's another concept that we talk about because in programming languages, you'll see them. You'll have the notion of a constant. A constant is a value that doesn't change. Okay. Pi, we hope, equals 3.14159. Okay. Bad joke time. My first master's degree was from Purdue University, which is in West Lafayette, Indiana. And they will always tell you when you go to Purdue that back around 1900, 100 and something years ago, some member of the Indiana state legislature thought it was unfair that students in 5th and 6th grade were supposed to learn that the ratio of a circumference to the radius of a circle is this irrational number, and students have to learn 3.14 or 3.14159 or go out of many decimal places. And that is unfair, and so he actually proposed a bill where the state of Indiana would set the value of pi to be 3. Great. All the kids in Indiana are going to get better grades because now pi is 3 and there's no longer any need to learn this. Well, I'm sorry, but the value of pi is a constant. It doesn't change, right? Pi is pi. We can go out more decimal places if we want. We can chop it off to 3 if we want, but the value doesn't change. That's a constant. So when we program we have the notion of something called a constant as something that doesn't change, different from a variable, which does change. Well, here's the bad news. Python, unlike other languages, doesn't really support constants. There is no notion of a constant in Python. Sorry, it just isn't there. We fake it. In CMSC 201, we fake it. Use all caps. If you're writing a program and you have a value that is not supposed to change, use it, give it a variable name, but use all caps, and that is symbolic to us. Okay, that is to our TAs, instructors, your fellow students, yourself. If you use all caps in the name, that means it's supposed to be a constant. Python really doesn't support constants, but okay, we fake it using all caps for a variable name. Yeah, cheating, but we need to cover the concept of constants, of things that aren't supposed to change the program. Python doesn't support it, so this is what we do. Okay, so if I said pi equals 3.14159, and now I print pi, there we go. It's a float, right? Python figures out that there's no single or double quotes, so it's not a string. And there's a decimal point, so it's not an int. Therefore, this must be a float. So Python says pi is a float, and here we go. Okay, let's go back to the slides and cover a couple of points. Now, let me come back up to where I started from. We started with syntax and semantics. Okay, then we said you need to learn these terms. Comment, variable, literal, constant, reserved word type. We've done all of these but one. What is a comment? A comment is a note to a human being about what's going on. It's important to explain because code can get hard to read. Python ignores it. The Python interpreter ignores your comment. It's a note to a human being. What's a variable? It's a symbolic name for something that's going to change. It has a type and it can change. What's a literal? It's an exact value. Use this exactly. We've talked about types. There are string literals. That was hello world in the single quotes or in the double quotes. That's fine. There are integer literals. There are float literals. There are 3.14159 is a float literal. 9, as I used it in PyChart, is an integer literal. A literal says use this exact value. It's not a variable. Constant is some quantity in your program that's not going to change. Python doesn't really support them. We fake it by using variable names with all caps, and if it's all caps, then we know stylistically it's not supposed to change in your program. It's supposed to be a constant. The only thing I haven't covered of these terms you need to know is reserved word. Now, reserved word, and I think I've got explanations for all of these things in here in the slides, so we'll go through there. What I want to get to is reserved words. Now, don't worry about what these mean yet. You will learn them all through the course of the semester. Some of them you already know. Reserved word means Python has a defined meaning for this word, and you cannot overwrite it. Okay, we talked about false. False, capital F-A-L-S-E, is a reserved word. It's a specific Boolean value. You cannot use false as a variable name. If you do, Python will complain because you're overloading the value of something that's already got one. False is a reserved word. Again, Python is case sensitive, so only capital F and the rest lower is a reserved word. You can use lower, F-A-L-S-E, as a variable name. Please don't. Please don't. You will confuse the heck out of me, and I tend to not grade things well like that. I mean, it's just a bad habit to get into. But you could. Python will not care. Okay. True is a reserved word that we've talked about already. The other things in here we have not yet talked about. We're going to cover a number of them on Wednesday. We'll get the rest of them as we go through the semester. But these are all reserved words in Python. Please do not use them for variable names, constant names, anything like that. If you do, your program will not work right, Python will complain, and you'll be trying to figure out why. And the answer is because you overloaded a reserved word. Okay. So reserved word is just something that has specially defined meaning in Python. The way a computer interpreter compiler works is it reads in sequences of characters, and it says, I recognize that. That is a variable name. I recognize that. That is a plus sign. I recognize that. That is the reserved word false. Okay. So that's what it does. These are things Python says, I'm going to recognize that string of letters. It's a reserved word. I have a meaning for it. You can't change it. So that's the other term that you need. The rest of the stuff, slides, variable. Now, as I said, talking in PyCharm, unlike other languages, you do not pre-declare a variable in Python. A variable is declared when you use it. What that means is if you look at other languages, you would have to say something like int a on a line by itself. That's a pre-declaration. That would be telling the system, whatever language it is, I'm going to use a variable that's an integer and I'm going to call it a. Okay, fine. Python, you don't have to do it. Python is smart enough to figure out you don't need it. That's what we mean by not pre-declaring it. Okay. Python interpreter recognizes you just declared a new variable and allocates a memory location to store its value. If it's a variable you've already used, Python recognizes and says, okay, whatever is in memory there, that's what you want to use. All right. You do have to initialize a variable before trying to use it. Initialize means assign it a value. Okay. Going back to PyCharm, when we say print B, B is a variable name, but B has no value. Python says, no. You haven't defined B. I have no clue what it is. I don't know if it's an integer. I don't know if it's a string. I don't know if it's a Boolean. You got to help me out here. You have to initialize it. You have to give it a value before you can use it. Okay, you can't print it without giving it some value. Okay, otherwise Python squawks. That is not a syntax. That is a semantic error. Yeah, you can call it a syntax error. I guess not giving it a value in Python. So you must give it a value. When somebody says initialize a variable, what they mean is give it an initial value. Give it a value before you use it. Using a variable before you've given it a value is a very, very common error. Get used to that error message. You will make it. Okay. One of the nice things, the equalizing things about computer programming is nobody does it perfectly. Nobody ever does it perfectly. Everybody makes errors. People who've been programming for 20 years, people who invented the Python language make mistakes. They make errors. An error in computer programming is called a bug, and removing errors is called debugging. You are going to spend a lot of time this semester debugging Python programs. I spend a lot of time debugging programs and code that I write to present to this class. It just happens. Human nature. We make mistakes. We make bugs. We have to remove them to get the code working. That's called debugging. A very common error, and so you might as well get used to it in your debugging, is trying to use an uninitialized variable. You don't do it on purpose. Nobody does it on purpose. You make a mistake. It happens. That's life. Okay. Python has a few rules for variable names, and I didn't realize how badly this was in terms of reading. So let me see if I can make that a little bit bigger and a little bit easier to read. Okay. So in a Python variable name, You can use uppercase letters, that is A to Z, inclusive, obviously. You can use lowercase letters, the little a to z. You could use digits 0 through 9, and you could use underscores, that underscore character. You cannot use any other characters. So different languages, different semantics, different syntax. Other languages will let you use hyphens, dollar signs, parentheses, pound signs, at signs. Other languages will let you use these. Python, no. Python, you can only use uppercase, lowercase, digits, and underscores. Underscores are the only special character you can have in a name. But there's one more rule, and let me make this bigger. Which is you cannot start with a digit. Okay? You cannot start a variable name with a digit. Okay? Too cool for school is not a valid variable. Cool for school is valid because it doesn't start with a digit. Variables can be any length. I mentioned this. Just like a string can be any length. A variable name itself can be any length. So let's go back to PyCharm and look at a few things. So for example, valid variable names are circle underscore circumference, circle 2 circumference, circle. Now, this is a valid variable name in Python, but by convention in Comp Sci 201, we would only use that for a constant. But if we're using it for a constant, that's perfectly valid. Python thinks it's fine. Okay. This 2 times around, this is an invalid Python variable because it starts with a digit. So if I came down here and I said 2 times around equals 6, Python gives me a syntax error, invalid syntax, because I started a variable name with a digit. If I said TWO times around equals 6, that's perfectly valid. That's a valid name. Or if I said times 2 around equals 6, that's a valid Python statement. The digits are okay. So, variable names. Uppercase, lowercase, digit, underscore, cannot start with a digit. It can start with an underscore. Underscore times 2 equals 6, perfectly valid. Okay, you can start with an underscore. Okay, works perfectly. You can start with an underscore. You can start with a letter. You cannot start with a digit. And we'll get into some cases where underscores are used to do variable names for a couple of things. Now, let me do one more thing, and then I wanted to show you the code the programs I talked about. This is not a Python rule. This is a CMSC 201 convention. Long variable names should use snake case, not camel case. That's just a convention. Why? I don't know. We like it. I've been teaching, this is my 4th semester teaching 201, and the people who taught it always just like snake case rather than camel case. What do I mean by that? Snake case, as I've typed it, means separate words with underscores. highest grade in class. This is a variable name in snake case. The uppercase H is valid, but I didn't want that. So this is snake case. Camel case run words together, but use uppercase for the first letter in each word. Highest grade in class. Two different variable names. Okay. This is called snake case. Snake case says use underscores in between the words to run it all together for your long and meaningful variable name. Camel case says use these uppercase letters at the beginning of each word. Now, syntactically, Python doesn't care. Python can recognize these things. Python will let you use them equally. As a convention in this class, we prefer snake case. You should use snake case. If you use camel case variable names, you'll get a little, hey, please don't do that. Use snake case instead. Why? Because we like them. I don't know. We just do. I prefer them. The other professors prefer them, so we do them that way. Python doesn't care. Just like with constants, Python doesn't care that all caps is used as a constant. All caps is a valid variable name. You could change the darn thing in the middle of the program. Python's cool. But we're not. Convention in this class, all caps, it's a constant. Don't change it. And if it's a long variable name, to make it meaningful, use snake case, not camel case. That's just a convention we like. It's not a Python rule. Python is cool with it. It goes. Okay. And in the last 7 minutes, I want to cover a couple of things I put out on Discord, and I want to explain them. Okay. First thing is, I mentioned to you that you, if you just download PyCharm by itself, depending on your computer, you might not get the Python interpreter. So what you'll need to do is go to python.org. Python.org is the site for all the latest distributions of Python. It also has a lot of background. It's a way to learn a bunch of stuff. It has documentation. It's a chat forum. It's whatever. For now, download. Go to downloads or go to here, the download. You get by default the latest one. The current version of Python is 3.9.1. You must, for this class, have some version of Python 3. If you have Python 3.7, 3.8, 3.9, all of those are good. 3.91 is current. If you have 3.7 on your computer, it's all cool. We're good with it. If you only have Python 2, so if you have a Mac that's over a year old and you've never downloaded Python, you probably have Python 2.7. Don't use 2.7. It works differently. You're going to have a bunch of problems. Go to python.org and download Python 3. If you're going to download, get the latest version, give 3.9.1. If your computer already has 3.7 or 3.8, you're good. You do not have to download 3.9.1. You can use 3.7. You can use 3.8. They should work fine in this class. But if you don't have the latest version, if you don't have Python 3 on your computer, if you don't have anything, you just went and got PyCharm, you may need to download Python. You do that by going to python.org, clicking the latest version, 3.9.1, and it'll come down and it'll tell you all about it. It tells you what's different. It tells you who wrote it, et cetera, et cetera. Just download, you're cool. That's one thing. I told you last time, I showed you how to SSH to gl.umbc.edu from a Mac if you're using Windows. Now, we used to teach something called putty. If you have Windows 10, you can have, then it's very similar to what I showed you on the Mac. This is the help page on Microsoft's documentation that tells you how to use SSH to SSH into gl.umbc.edu from the Windows terminal. So if you have Windows 10, then these are the instructions. Open up a Windows terminal, and this is how you use SSH to go into gl.umbc.edu. It works the same way as it did on the Mac that I showed you last Wednesday. You type SSH space. This is going to be your UMBC username. So in my case, this would be ARSENAUL, Arsenal at, and in this case, you would type gl.umbc.edu. That's what machine means. So in this case, I would type, Arsenal at gl.umbc.edu. And then you're going to get prompted to enter your password. Remember that because gl.umbc.edu is a Linux machine, it does not echo anything when you're typing your password. Type your whole password and hit enter. Hit return, whatever you want to call that key. Right. It won't echo your password. You won't see dots. You won't see asterisks. You won't see anything when you're typing your password, but it's taking it. Go ahead and type your password and hit enter. That will let you log on. If you mistype your password, obviously, it's going to give you an error message and you get to try again. Now, it is the same password you use to log on to anything else at umbc.edu. So it's the same password you'll set. This is how you're using it on Windows. If you are using Windows 7 or 8, then let me know. There's about a 3-minute video. I'm not going to do it in this class because I suspect that's not going to be very many of you. If you're using Windows 7 or 8, you need to use something called PuTTY to SSH in because Windows 7 and 8 don't have SSH inbuilt. Okay, 10 does. Microsoft finally got around to it in Windows 10. So you have Windows 10, follow these instructions. If you're using Windows 7 or 8, let me know, and I'll give you the link to a video. There's a video UMBC put on YouTube that tells you how to do this. It's about a 3-minute video. I normally show this in class. I don't want to today because, there's not a whole lot of people who do have it. I will have it. Yes, username at. So in other words, coming into my chat box, sorry. Let's see if I can do it here. So in other words, in my case, it's arsenal at gl.umbc.edu. There's no spaces, it's just at. Okay. All right, now. Question, let's see. I can tell what version of Python you have on the Mac. The easiest way, one of the easy way to do this is bring up a terminal. Let me share it. Make sure I've got a terminal. I don't have a terminal running. Hang on a second. I've got to fix this. So on a Mac, you go to Launchpad. You go to Other, and you go to Terminal. And now I have a terminal up, and now I can share this terminal, I believe. Here's what you'll need to do. Type Python 3. Run that together. No spaces. Type Python 3. Okay? And you will get some feedback. And so in this case, you will see on my screen that my default, I am running Python 3.8.5. So I have not upgraded to 3.9, but 3.8.5 is good enough for this class. But that's what you do. Type Python 3. If you type Python 3 and you get an error message that it's not a recognized command, that means you only have Python 2, and now you got to go download it. Okay, so that's question. Terminal, how do I get to PyCharm? Nicole, PyCharm Are you okay? When you say, Nicole, when you say you're comes up at the terminal, how do you get to PyCharm? Are you on a Mac or on Windows?
I'm on a Mac. Hello? Can you hear me?
I apologize. I can't hear you if you're speaking. Okay. The short, let me jump ahead since I'm running out of time again here. I apologize for that. No, I can't hear you.
Yeah.
On a Mac, look under Launchpad for PyCharm if you've downloaded it. Okay, I've apparently muted something. Hang on just a second. Okay, we'll try that. But if you're on a Mac, look under Launchpad, and if you're on Windows, it should be an application that you can start from the either the start window or possibly even a desktop icon. Okay, on a Mac, yeah, it's under Launchpad on a Mac. Okay, the other thing I wanted to show you, I apologize for running over. If you have to drop, that's okay. The other thing I wanted to show you is WinSCP. If you need to transfer files, I've talked about programming on your laptop. If you need to transfer files from your laptop to GL or vice versa, the easiest thing to do is SCP. SCP stands for Secure Copy. On a Mac, you would do it in a terminal. On Windows, you would use a program called WinSCP. So go to winscp.net and download it. And now we're going to try a live demo, which hopefully will work. We're going to find out. We're going to see if I can share something from my Windows box. The application I want to share is WinSCP. When you download and install WinSCP on your Windows box, it looks like this. It's a command explorer. And what you will have is over on this side here, this will be the directory on your Windows laptop, on your local box. And this will be the directory on gl.umbc.edu. So to transfer a file using WinSCP from your laptop to GL is a fairly simple copy and paste, okay? So I've already done this with homework 0. So let's pick another one that I haven't moved already. So this is last semester's homework 6.3, part 3.py. I just drag it over, and now you can see I've moved it from my laptop to GL. It is now on GL. I can now submit it for full credit, and I'm done. That's all it is. Now, unfortunately, on a Mac, it's not that easy. You have to go into your terminal. Let's make sure I'm sharing content. On my Mac, I have, let me open a new terminal. The command is SCP. Remember, SCP stands for Secure Copy. And then it's a command where I would say the file name, and then I would give it arsenal at gl.umbc.edu. And now it's a \, and then the directory you want it, which is a tilde. Tilde means your home directory, and you would transfer it that way. And since we're over time, we'll go into syntax. But this is the stuff that I posted on Discord. If you are going to do your programming on your laptop, which is optional, you don't have to, but if you're going to do your programming on your laptop, and move it over to GL to submit it. If you're on Windows, I would recommend you get WinSCP. If you're on a Mac, you will do it by using the SCP from the terminal, because there's nothing that's really good like WinSCP that's free. There are a couple of applications to do it graphically on a Mac, but with a Mac, you just do it with this terminal window and a command line. We'll get it. And at that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. I appreciate your patience. We will pick this up where we left off on Wednesday. I will be available for a little while now, but I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And then recording, stop. Okay, typically on